We've all skipped warm-ups, running late, forgot, didn't have any space, and nothing bad happened. The voice worked just fine. So if warm-ups are so essential, why doesn't skipping them seem to matter? That's the question we rarely stop to ask. Do vocal warm-ups actually work? Not do they feel good. Most singers report that they do. But do they accomplish what we've been told they accomplish? Do they protect us from injury? Do they prepare the voice in some measurable physiological way? Here's what troubles me. I've watched countless singers run through their warm-up routines, and what I see is scales on autopilot. Lip trills done while scrolling through phones, exercises executed with the same bad habits they'll carry into their songs. The warm-up becomes a ritual, something you do because you're supposed to, not because you're actually accomplishing anything. Everyone says warm-ups are essential. Everyone says they protect your voice. Everyone says skipping them is risky. But when I looked at the research, the honest answer surprised me. Before we dive into the science, let's ask a historical question. Where did the idea of warming up for safety come from? If you look at the great pedagogues of classical singing, Manuel Garcia, Matilda Marchesi, the entire bel canto tradition, you'll find something interesting. They wrote extensively about vocalese and exercises. Garcia published his comprehensive treatise on singing in the 1840s. Bacai, Concone, and Panofka all produced method books full of exercises. But here's what's striking. None of them framed these exercises as injury prevention. They were focused on skill acquisition. The exercises existed to build technique for singing classical repertoire, developing agility, smoothing registration, refining breath control. The question wasn't, how do we protect the voice? It was, how do we master this art form? That's a fundamentally different orientation. The injury prevention framing is surprisingly recent. In 1983, Cornelius Reed first addressed the concept of fatigue resistance in relation to vocal warm-ups. In 1986, Richard Miller popularized the idea further, and his influence on American voice pedagogy was enormous. Then, in 2000, Ingo Titze, one of the most respected voice scientists in the field, connected warm-ups explicitly to injury prevention. And where did it come from? It was borrowed from sports medicine. The thinking went something like this. Athletes warm up before exercise to prevent injury, so singers should warm up before singing to prevent injury. It seems logical, it feels intuitive, but there's a problem. Even in sports medicine, the evidence isn't as strong as we assume. A 2024 analysis in Sports Medicine by Alfonso and colleagues examined whether athletic warm-ups actually prevent injury. They reviewed the research systematically. Their conclusion? Despite widespread claims that warm-up is essential for injury prevention, there is no data to prove this general belief. Let that sink in. The field we borrowed this concept from, the field that's been studying athletic warm-ups for decades, with far more research funding than voice science will ever see, can't actually prove that warm-ups prevent injury in athletes. So the foundation we borrowed from? It's shakier than we thought. Let's look at what voice science has actually demonstrated about warm-ups. And I want to be careful here, because the picture is nuanced. This isn't a simple warm-ups are fake story. It's more complicated than that. First, the good news. Warm-ups don't appear to be harmful. and singers consistently report that warming up improves their perceived ease of phonation. That subjective experience is real, and I'm not here to dismiss it. If you feel better after warming up, that feeling is valid. But here's where it gets complicated. In 1995, Elliott, Sundberg, and Gramming published a foundational study in the Journal of Voice examining what happens during vocal warm-up. This is one of the most cited papers in the field on this topic. Their honest conclusion? Although the subjective effect is often considerable, the underlying physiological effects are largely unknown. That was 30 years ago. You might expect that by now we'd have filled in those gaps. We haven't. The situation hasn't changed much. The mechanisms we assume are happening during warm-up, increased blood flow to the larynx, reduced vocal fold viscosity, tissue temperature changes, these all sound scientific. They make intuitive sense, but they remain largely theoretical. As Huck and Sandage noted in their 2018 analysis, while there is ample evidence in exercise, science that increased blood flow to working muscles occurs in the skeletal muscles of the arms and legs, it is not yet evidence supported for the skeletal muscles of the larynx. Let me say that again. The assumption that warm-up increases blood flow to your larynx, not actually proven in humans. We assume the voice works like a hamstring, but we haven't demonstrated that it does. What about tissue temperature? The only published temperature measurement study used an excised bovine larynx, not a living human. And later, calculations by Tietze suggested that temperature increases from normal phonation are only about 0.005 degrees Celsius. That's essentially nothing. Some studies have even found the results that contradict the theory entirely. Model, Fisher, and Layden published a 2003 study in the Journal of Voice that measured phonation threshold pressure, essentially how much effort it takes to get the vocal folds vibrating, before and after warm-up in soprano singers. If warm-up works the way we think, it should make phonation easier. The threshold should go down. Instead, they found warm-up actually increased phonation threshold pressure at high pitch, the exact opposite of what the theory predicts. Their interpretation? Maybe warm-up increases vocal fold viscosity rather than decreasing it. We don't really know. What about injury prevention specifically? In 2007, a Cochrane systematic review examined whether voice training prevents voice disorders. Cochrane reviews are the gold standard for evidence synthesis. They're rigorous, systematic, and as unbiased as research gets. After analyzing all available randomized controlled traits, the authors concluded, we found no evidence that either direct or indirect voice training, or the two combined, are effective in improving vocal function. Not weak evidence, not mixed results, nothing. The highest quality review we have couldn't find support for the claim that voice training prevents voice disorders. A 2012 survey by Gish and colleagues adds another layer to this. They found that 54% of singers always warm up before singing, and most believe warm-ups prevent injury. But here's the striking find. 26% of those who always warmed up still reported experiencing vocal problems. Over a quarter of the most diligent warm-up practitioners had voice issues anyway. If warm-ups were truly protective, you'd expect that number to be much lower. There's also a fascinating disconnect between what singers perceive and what can objectively be measured. Moorcroft and Kenny studied classically trained female singers and found that every single one of them perceived significant improvements after warming up, in tone quality, technical command, and how their voice felt. But when expert listeners evaluated the recordings, they could barely detect any difference. The only thing listeners could sometimes identify was when singers moderated extremely fast or slow vibrato. The benefits appear to be primarily perceived by the singer, not heard by the audience. That's not nothing. Perception matters, but it's different from what we've been told. Now, this doesn't mean warm-ups are useless, but the specific claims we make about them, particularly around injury prevention and physiological preparation, outpace what science has actually demonstrated. We've been teaching as fact things that remain unproven. So if warm-ups aren't the protective shield we've been told, what's actually going on? And why does any of this matter? Here's what I think is the real issue, and this is what troubles me more than any research finding. The concept of warming up gives us permission to practice mindlessly. Think about what the phrase implies. Warming up suggests the voice isn't ready, that it needs some kind of preparation before it can function properly. Like a car engine on a cold morning. You've got to let it idle before you can drive. But your voice isn't a car engine. Your larynx is inside your body at body temperature, with blood flowing whether you're singing or not. The voice is always warm, in the literal sense. It doesn't need to be brought up to an operating temperature. It's ready to phonate the moment you decide to use it. What the voice needs isn't warming up. It needs intentional use. And that's where the warm-up concept often fails us. When we think we're just getting ready, we give ourselves permission to be mentally absent. We run scales without any attention to technique. We do lip trills while thinking about something else entirely. We practice the same exercises with the same inefficient coordination we've always had, the same tongue tension, the same breath patterns, the same registration breaks. And then we wonder why those exact patterns show up in our songs. The truth? Every repetition is either building a good habit or reinforcing a bad one. There's no neutral. There's no, it doesn't count because I'm just warming up. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between warm-up and performance. It just knows what you practiced. That scale you just sang on autopilot, you practiced something. The question is whether you practiced what you actually want. If you did it with tension, you practiced tension. If you did it with a tight jaw, you practiced a tight jaw. If you did it while disengaged, you practiced being disengaged. Sang it out of tune, you just reinforced singing out of tune. I've seen singers spend 20 minutes on warm-ups and then complain that they can't break bad habits. But they just spent 20 minutes reinforcing those bad habits. The warm-up gave them permission to practice badly because it didn't count. The bel canto masters understood something we've forgotten. Their exercises weren't warm-ups, they were skill building. Each vocalese had a specific purpose: to develop agility, to smooth registration, to refine vowel modification, to build dynamic control. Garcia didn't write exercises so singers could get ready to sing. He wrote exercises so singers could get better at singing. The goal was never to prepare the voice. The goal was master the art. That's a fundamentally different mindset, and I think we lost something important when we reframed exercises as warm-ups rather than training. So what's the practical takeaway? I'm not saying you should stop doing exercises before you sing. I'm saying we should reframe what we're doing and why. First, focus on skill building instead of warming up. If you're going to do scales before you sing, do them with intention. What specifically are you working on? Breath management? Registration? Resonance? Have a purpose for every exercise. Before you start, ask yourself what skill you're trying to build. Then, pay attention while you do it. Notice what's happening, make adjustments, be present. 5 focused minutes of intentional practice beats 20 minutes of mindless repetition every time. The research supports this. Ragsdale and colleagues found that singers reported improved ease of singing after 5 or 10 minutes of warm-up, but 15 minutes provided no additional benefit. More isn't better. Better is better. Second, if warm-ups help you mentally prepare, that's legitimate. But know what you're getting. The psychological benefits of a routine, of transitioning into singing mode, is real. Ritual matters. A consistent pre-performance routine can help you focus, calm nerves, and get into the right headspace. But don't confuse that psychological readiness with physiological protection. You're not building an invisible shield around your vocal folds. You're getting your head in the game, and that's worth something. But it's different from what we've been told. If your warm-up routine helps you mentally, keep doing it. Just be honest about what it's actually providing. Third, if you're going to do traditional warm-ups, 5 to 10 minutes is plenty. Longer isn't better. Excessive warm-up may actually cause fatigue before you've even started singing the material that matters. You could be tiring your voice out on exercises and then wondering why you don't have stamina for your songs. Iverson and colleagues found that 5 minutes of vocal warm-up actually increased self-perceived vocal effort in healthy individuals. It went back to baseline after 5 minutes of rest. So if you do warm-up extensively, you might want to build in some quiet time before you perform. The big takeaway? Stop thinking of exercises as something separate from real singing. There's no such thing as practice that doesn't count. Every exercise is an opportunity to build skill or to reinforce habits you don't want. Approach your exercises with the same attention you'd bring to a difficult passage in a song. That's not warming up. That's training. And training is what actually makes you better. You've been told your whole singing life that warm-ups are essential, that skipping them is dangerous, that you need those 20 to 30 minutes before you're safe to sing. Teachers, coaches, other singers, everyone reinforces the same message. And here I am saying the evidence doesn't support it. Here's the reality. You don't have to warm up for 30 minutes to be safe. The research doesn't support that claim. You don't have to feel guilty when you're running late and skip your routine. You don't have to believe that you're damaging your voice every time you sing without extensive preparation. The masters of bel canto weren't obsessed with protecting their voices from injury. They were obsessed with building skill. Garcia, Marchesi, all of them. They cared about mastery, not safety. And their students developed some of the most remarkable voices in history. Maybe that shift in focus made all the difference. The voice is remarkably resilient. It's designed to be used. What it needs isn't extensive preparation. It needs skilled, intentional use. Good technique. Practice that builds the coordination you actually want. Every time you sing, you're either getting better or reinforcing habits you'll have to unlearn later. That's true whether you're warming up or performing. The question isn't whether you warmed up enough. The question is whether you're practicing well. So the next time you sit down to do your pre-singing routine, ask yourself, what am I actually practicing right now? What skill am I building? Am I present or am I on autopilot? If the answer is nothing specific, consider whether that time could be spent more intentionally. You have permission to question what you've been told. and you have permission to focus on what actually matters. Getting better at singing, one intentional rep at a time. That's what we focus on at Voci Academy, building fundamental skills like scales, intervals, and sight reading with intention and understanding. Not mindless repetition, but purposeful practice grounded in how the voice actually works. Every exercise has a purpose. Every rep counts. If you're ready to shift from warming up to actually improving, visit voicescience.org to learn more. Thanks for spending this time with me. Until next time, keep singing smart.